Let's get joined up. Today's show is brought to you by Audible, and right now you can get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/joinedup. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. So thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a regular show about all things writing, including interviews with authors, screenwriters, and key figures from the publishing industry. Plus loads of hints, tips, and inspiration for all creatives. You can follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast, leave a quick iTunes review, or just tell a friend.
Joined Up Writing.
Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 146, and this week I'm talking to Benjamin Cross, author of debut thriller Colony. Ben's an archaeologist as well as an author, and we talk about where the two overlap and dig deep into his writing past. You see what I did there? I went straight for the obvious joke because I really dig puns. Sorry. Anyway, it's an interesting chat, so you'll want to check that out. A very quick catch up from me before that. So last week I told a barefaced lie to you all and said I'd start sending out my novel again, promising to submit to 5 more places before this week's episode went out. That's because I made the mistake of starting to read the damn thing again, and I began to fret about whether the beginning was as good as it could be, whether the short prologue works or is even needed, whether the story starts at exactly the right moment, and on it went until I'd totally bottled it, as we say around here, or I lost my resolve. So don't worry, I'm not going to totally give up, but I do need to properly answer some of those questions. So this week's task is to take up the offer of another writer friend who's volunteered to read the first few chapters and give me some feedback. So stay tuned and watch this space for further updates on that. What have you guys been up to though? How are your projects going? Are you still writing and getting your stuff out there all through the madness? Please let me know, as I'd love to hear from you. And you can do that by tweeting me at JU Podcast, emailing Wayne at Wayne Kelly Writes, or dropping me a line on the FB page. Also, don't forget to join the email mailing list at joinedupwriting.co.uk. It's totally free and you get a couple of downloadable goodies when you sign up, and you'll be the first to find out about upcoming shows and events. What else have I been doing? Lots of reading, both fiction and non-fiction, and also preparing for the release of a new single that my band The Rye Dogs are putting out this coming Thursday as I record this, so January the 28th. It's called No Love, No Life, and it'll be available on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and everywhere else. But because I'm a sucker for podcast exclusives myself, I thought you might be interested to get a sneak preview. So here's a quick 1-minute clip before we crack on with today's interview.
So hold on tight, my love, I'm showing you a place we can begin. Who knows what waits for us under the stars, what secrets are within. No love, no life. No love, no life.
There you go, that's No Love, No Life by The Rye Dogs. That's spelt WRYDOGS, The Rye Dogs. And you can find a whole album of other songs right now on Spotify, Apple Music and Amazon Music, or wherever you get your music from. You can also purchase the album from iTunes if that's still how you like to do it. Other than that, yeah, check it out and let me know what you think. Right, let's get on with today's interview with Benjamin Cross. So Ben's an archaeologist and writer based in South Wales in the UK. He's been lucky enough to explore some of the world's most spectacular ancient sites, from the temples of Cambodia to the Andean cloud forest cities of Peru and beyond. His short fiction has been selected for publication in the prestigious Maze anthology twice, which is a rare feat, and his debut novel, Colony, is released on January 28th, everywhere you can get great books. So enjoy the chat, and I'll pop back at the end for the sign-off.
Joined Up Writing.
Okay, Ben, thanks a million for joining me on Joined Up Writing. Really appreciate it. So why don't you just start off, just give us a sense of where you're speaking from and how things are going. I know I've just heard about the new puppy, so that's obviously big impact on the life at the minute.
Yeah, it's been quite something that actually we've been thinking about getting a dog for quite a few years, and we made the decision we'd wait until the boys were a little bit older. My boys are 6 and 5 at the moment, so we wanted them to be, able to sort of get themselves up onto the couch if they needed to escape, basically. So we've reached that stage, and little Ludo, the border terrier, has joined us recently. So yeah, we actually moved as a family out to southwest Wales a couple of years ago. We were living in Oxfordshire before, and myself and my wife, we'd always had a love of Wales and Carmarthenshire in particular. I think she'd been going there on holiday since she was younger, and around the Pembrokeshire coast, and myself as well. So we had a look at it and decided we were going to take the plunge. So yeah, I'm beaming to you live now from Carmarthenshire. From the hills of Wales.
Very nice, lovely part of the world. So
Yeah.
why don't you start off telling us about your book, your debut novel, Colony?
Yeah, okay. So Colony is, as you say, it's my debut. It's going to be released on the 28th of January this year. I've been writing it for quite a long time, really. I mean, there's the sort of seed of an idea started to take root maybe as long as a decade ago. I started having, sort of images and things and little narrative snippets sort of coming into my head about an Arctic setting and an island and people who were over there for one purpose suddenly finding that they actually had to fight a little bit harder just to keep their heads on the necks, as it were. And so it sort of blossomed. I started putting words on the page, and yeah, here we are, sort of 10 years later. 2 kids and many grey hairs later as well. And it's about to hit the shelves.
Brilliant. So tell us, what's the premise?
So the premise is the main character is a guy called Callum Ross. He's a professor of archaeology at the University of Aberdeen, and he gets sent on a survey on an island up in the northern Arctic. It's a little archipelago just off the north coast of Russia. Well, I say just; it's about 1,000 kilometres. So it's very much north.
Yeah.
And it's called Franz Josef Land, and it was one of the last land masses to be discovered by humanity, at least in modern times. And he's out there with another team of surveyors looking at things like ecology, etc. And he happens upon this really exciting discovery. It's for him as an archaeologist, it's the discovery of a lifetime. It's an ice mummy. So it's basically a frozen corpse, a prehistoric corpse, and because of the conditions, it's effectively been freeze dried, and it's survived in sort of near perfect condition for thousands of years. But the thing that really gets Callum's brain racing when he finds it is that it looks as if it's been, it hasn't had the nicest of ends, basically. It's been mutilated, and there are other strange bits and pieces around the body as well, which form a little bit of a mystery for him. And he sets out to try and solve it. But unfortunately for him, there are other people involved with this particular survey as well who have got completely different other ideas about what they want to see happen on Harmsworth Island. And one of those is an eco-terrorist. And he has particular reservations, to put it mildly, about the fact that the survey is being taken ahead of potentially the development of a gas plant by a Russian gas company. And so he sets out to sabotage the mission. And without giving too much more away, he ends up stranding the team on the island, along with the security forces who were providing security for the boat that they were all stationed on. and it's not long before they realise that actually they're not alone on this island, and they're in pretty deep trouble. So yeah.
Exciting premise, and as you say, a very kind of thriller-based thing, and you've billed it as Callum, a Callum Ross thriller, so it's kind of suggesting that it's a series. So, what made you want to write a series, and how did you go about creating that main character with the series in mind?
Yeah, so I guess if I'm completely honest with you, Wayne, when I first started writing the book, I hadn't got a series in mind. Mm-hmm. I just had a concept, and as I say, it was for there to be a main character who was trapped on an island in the Arctic. I've always loved the setting, the Arctic setting. I think it's incredibly dramatic. There's all sorts of adventure and excitement, even given the stillness and the remoteness of the place. It seemed the perfect place really for an adventure. But obviously, as I sort of developed the character of Callum, as a lot of writers do, you become to familiarise yourself, and I wouldn't say you become friends, but you kind of you do form a kind of a relationship almost with your characters. Yeah. And so I suppose by the time I'd kind of got well into the novel, I was enjoying hanging around Callum. He made me laugh. He was having exciting adventures, and I thought he was a nice guy. So yeah, that's probably when the idea that I'd want to write him into other books really took root.
And did you think, did it kind of, when you were editing the book with that in mind, because presumably when you're writing it, as you said, it wasn't the forefront of your mind, but when you're editing it, it probably was more on your mind. You were thinking, well, there could be more books with this. I've got potentially other stories to tell. Do you think that affected the way that you edited the book in terms of thinking about his character or building things in or questions for future stories and things like that?
To a certain extent, yeah. I mean, I've got the next instalment, as it were, sort of already plotted, at least in my mind. So I know kind of where I'm going to take it. And interestingly enough, I think Callum is, obviously he's the lead character, but I guess in a sense, he's very much an objective correlative, really, for a lot of the other characters that that are involved in the tale. You've got some extremely loud characters in Colony. You've got the likes of Starshina Koikov, who is a Spetsnaz, essentially a sergeant or a sergeant major. So you've got this very, very sort of imposing and imperious soldier there with a sort of a hook-shaped scar down the side of his face, barking orders around the place. You've got some mysterious and also very much sort of imposing and imperious Russian gas executives. And you've got some very colourful surveyors out there as well. You've got a kind of almost like an Einstein-like professor of geology out there for part of the book, and a sort of very highly strung Canadian paleontologist out there as well, who, no matter what the danger, she will jump at the opportunity to discuss sort of academic concepts and things, such as her fascination. So Callum is actually surrounded by an awful lot of potentially much more colourful characters, So I think that in as much as it can sort of feed into my thinking for the next book at all, that sort of allows me to just plonk Callum into the next book and see how he reacts to those around him, really. I think that's his role, isn't it? Yeah, basically.
And you kind of, obviously your main character is got archaeology. He's an archaeologist, and where on earth do you get that idea from? I mean, how did you come up with that, or is it anything to do with what you do as a day-to-day job?
Well, well might you ask there, Wayne. It is indeed. It's what I've been doing for some years now, really. I went to, in the early noughties, I went to university, and I started off there doing English literature. And ironically, I guess, for somebody that's now talking about writing a novel, I didn't find it quite. It was quite doing it for me, and there were very specific reasons for that. I think it was that, and this is not to take anything away from the tutors or anybody else on the course,
just where you were at the time.
I found that I was being almost, pushed towards feeling certain ways about certain novels, and saying certain things. And made to read things that I wouldn't necessarily have wanted to read, and so it seemed to sap some of the enjoyment out of what was a favourite pastime for me, which was obviously reading at the time. So I remember sort of being sat around one day, probably looking very morose and sorry for myself, and I had a couple of friends more widely within the university, and one of them said, "Well, why don't you switch course then?" I know a guy who's been doing archaeology. He wants to go and sort of dig up ancient stuff and write about it, and explore. And I thought, that's not a bad idea, actually. That, maybe I should look into it.
I didn't know whether you'd been watching Indiana Jones or something at the time, and that may be.
Yeah, I got the sudden urge. Grab a trowel and I mean, I wasn't very much a fan of Indiana Jones when I was younger. I grew up, I was born in the early '80s, so it was very topical while I was at that sort of impressionable age, and it remains obviously one of my very favourite films.
But I shouldn't imagine it's a very accurate depiction of what archaeology involves, though.
Do you know what, Wayne? You're spot on. It's a very glamorous and a very dramatic portrayal of what archaeology can be all about. And in fact, I seem to remember when I first moved on to the archaeology course, one of the very first lectures that we did was a guy, I say a guy, an eminent archaeological professor over here, basically telling us not to believe what we'd seen in Indiana Jones.
Just in case.
Sort of disabuse us of that from the start. So, it's very much, it's exciting. It's a thrilling career, but I haven't had to run away from any enormous boulders or, nobody's tried to shoot me with an arrow or a gun yet. So, it's not quite the same.
One thing that did occur to me, though, there are some parallels between archaeology and writing, in the fact that you kind of dig in, you're uncovering stories, because, I should imagine that's a big part of what you do, and then having to clean them up to kind of present them to the world, which, is editing and whatever. But I should imagine, to a certain extent, imagination and that storytelling thing, it is a big part of your day job as well, presumably, because you're, finding to what some people, the untrained eye, sometimes they might think, well, that's just a bit of rubbish that I've just found in the, it's a rusty old piece of metal or whatever it happens to be. When you look at it, but you're, obviously using your knowledge and your training and everything else. But I should imagine that there are you do have to kind of make leaps of imagination and things with it as well.
You're absolutely right there, Wayne. You do. There's a huge crossover, really. It may appear to be quite a subtle and, a peripheral link, but in a very real sense, both storytelling and also, the process of digging and interpreting archaeology is the process of forming a narrative, and putting it out there in a relatable form and trying to engage people with it. I had a site that I've been dealing with recently where somebody had dug some foundations, and we'd had a guy out there watching as they did it to make sure that nothing, if there was any archaeology, they could record it. Yeah. And what we found in there was not very much really at all. We found a few scraps of pottery and not much else. Mm-hmm. But after that, we sent that pottery away to some experts who looked at it and said, well, actually, what you've got here is some quite rare funerary Saxon pottery. Mm-hmm. We find this stuff almost 99% of the time in association with cremation urns and things of this nature. Mm-hmm. So immediately, you've got much more than just a couple of scraps of pottery. Immediately, you've got, a potential cremation, a potential burial from the Dark Ages. Mm-hmm. And then it's over to us basically with our sort of knowledge of the particular area and that particular period to put that into a relatable form to publicly disseminate. So yeah, there's a massive crossover actually, Wayne, and it's something that occurred to me more and more during the writing process with Colony actually.
So, as you say, a while ago you started off where you thought you were kind of going to be going down this track of maybe writing, then you hopped over to archaeology. At what point did the two things kind of cross back over for you, or you thought, actually, I want to have another crack at that, or I think I've got a story to tell, or whatever? When did that sort of happen? I know you mentioned you've been writing the novel for a few years, but is this the first novel, this one that's being published now, is this the first novel that you've written? Is it the first one you've finished? Have you tried other ones?
No, it's certainly not the first one that I've attempted. I mean, I've sort of as a complete subplot to what I've been doing academically with English Lit and things. I've always written fiction. I remember from when I was very young being fascinated by books. And I think I was about 7 years old or so when I first picked up The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, and absolutely devoured it. And I've moved on, and I was reading things like Terry Pratchett and things of that nature. I guess at that period in my life, it was the sort of books that I was going for they had a kind of a cartoonishness to them, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So there wasn't the necessarily the sort of graphic gore and those sorts of things that you get in adult thrillers. But there was certainly that sense of adventure and suspense and peril and very, very colourful characters. And I think I decided, well, this is a great thing. I'd enjoy to get involved. And I started doing things like writing down fictional diary accounts that involved myself and cousins and friends. And they were basically just regurgitations of stories that other people had told me, but with me and my friends put into the lead roles, as it were.
Yeah.
So nothing particularly original at that age, but it certainly sort of got me, addicted. And then, through school, I was always writing poetry, and I had various teachers who would really encourage me with it and put bits and pieces up on the wall, and really try and sort of get that. I suppose they recognised an interest, at least, if not a little bit of a sort of early flair for writing in me, and tried to nurture it, which was great. So on into my teens, and I started attempting novels. I went for, let's see, I'd written. I'm trying to remember what the very first one was about. Actually, I think it was a kind of a almost like a Disney plot. So there was a guy who turned up one day at a couple's house, and he was dishevelled and he needed help. So they took him in, and then strange things started happening, basically. And it turned out that he was leading this kind of double life. And I got very into it. I must have written about maybe 50,000 words or so, which at that age, as you'll relate to, Wayne, was quite an undertaking.
Yeah.
Amongst going out and getting drunk with friends. So, I kind of went from there and attempted to write various other novels. And I ended up, when I was doing my postgrad, I had my first piece of fiction published, which was a short story. It was called The Changing Room, and it was selected for the Maze Anthology, which is basically a short story collection that comes out annually. And it's billed as the best new writing from students at Oxbridge, basically. So they put the call out and you can submit, and then I was lucky enough to be published. And then the second year that I was there, I got a piece published as well called Enclosure. And then the third year, I became the Oxford Associate Editor for the Maze Anthology, because I thought it was a brilliant platform. Certainly it allowed me exposure at that time. And I thought it was great for getting, some early writers and some very talented young writers out into the public view. And it was a wonderful thing to be involved with. And it led at the time to my first encounter with a literary agent as well, which was obviously at the time a fantastic thing. It was a real sort of sense of achievement, a real sense of sort of validation for what I was writing, that somebody would be interested enough to, want to talk to me about it. And I ended up going to her office in London, and we basically talked, and she said, "So I loved your short story in the Maze. Have you written a novel?" And I said, "No."
Yeah.
and she said, "Well, I think your writing's great. What you really need to do is stay in touch and write a novel."
Yeah.
And so I took that as inspiration and started writing another novel. This one was about a blind person who made friends with a kid, and they together they basically were witness to a murder, and then it's how they sort of escaped from the perpetrators and ultimately solved it. But it went the way of an awful lot of early novels, I think, Wayne, and you'll probably understand this as well. It never quite made it to completion.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, that kind of was the end of that, really. And my mind moved on at that time to what I was studying and things of that nature, and getting into the world of work, really.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of going to say. I assumed at some point that obviously what you were actually at university to study took over, and plus getting a job and all the rest of it. So at what point did it kind of flick back over and you started to think again about writing and how did you go about that? Was it you started writing short stories again, or did you have another crack at another novel? How did that come about?
I think it was a number of factors, but certainly when I first started off in archaeology, it's an incredibly interesting environment to be in, and not just in terms of the things that you're finding, but in terms of the other people that get involved.
Sure, yeah.
It's kind of like, if we talk about a colourful cast of characters, you really want to go out onto a dig site, and you'll have all the colourful characters you've ever wanted to see. So I've worked with people who could grow beard hairs on the end of their nose. I've worked with people who you would go to a bar with, and you'd turn around and there'd be an eyeball on the table, and they'd got a false eye, and they'd just taken it out and aimed it at you. People who used to hoard newspapers. I mean, there were all sorts of incredibly inspiring individuals. And I think it started making me think, hey, wouldn't this be a great sort of thread for a story?
Uh-huh.
And I think at the time I was probably thinking, wouldn't this make a wonderful sitcom?
Yeah.
But I think that's when it really took root again, and it started to sort of inspire me and get me thinking about writing and stories and narratives again. And that gradually turned into an idea for a novel based on my archaeology experience. It kind of went from there, really. I started putting pen to paper, and Colony began.
Yeah, in earnest. So what was your kind of, talk me through as you said, it took a few years to write, which is usually the case with especially when you're having your first sort of proper crack at it. But talk me through the path to publication. How did you end up to where you are now? As we speak, it's going to come out in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. So it must have been about 2016, I guess, when I'd finished an early draft of Colony, and I started sending it around to agents at the time. I'd had a good experience previously with a literary agent, and I'd recognised the value that they could bring straight away. I'd felt the support, and it was a great thing. So I thought that's the way for me, rather than just going straight to publishers, as a lot of authors will do. And I started sending it round, and I was getting the usual sort of, I had a few requests for full manuscripts. I had the usual rejections from others. And then I was walking along one night, and I had a phone call, and it was a lady called Joanna Swainson, who's at Hardman and Swainson Literary Agency. And she basically phoned me up and said, "Look, I've just read your submission, and it sounds great. I think this is an awesome idea. Send me the full manuscript, and I'll take a look at it." So I did. And then she came back to me again about a week later and said, "Yeah, I love this," she said. but I think it's going to need a little bit of work.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously I was thrilled to bits anyway that anybody had said that they loved it enough to progress discussions.
Yeah.
So I went back to her immediately and said, well, what do you think it needs? And she worked with me tirelessly, I have to say. I love Joanna. She's a really wonderful person. She worked with me on the novel. She must have read it God knows how many times, coming back with suggestions and things of this nature. And gradually we kind of kicked it and punched it and bullied it into a shape that we felt was ready to submit to publishers. We then started the process of submitting, and we decided we were going to go for basically the big five. So we sending it out to the larger publishers. And quite honestly, it was the response that I got on it from these publishers was overwhelming. All of them were interested in discussing it, and they all wanted to know more. A couple of them were coming back with things like, yeah, we really love this. This has been a guilty pleasure for me reading, at night and things, and incredibly edifying stuff as a young writer, And then we would always progress the discussions, with Transworld and Little Brown and publishers of that ilk, and we'd get to a certain point, and then we would hit the same barrier. They would basically look at the difference or the comparison in sales between action thrillers and other popular genres like crime, for example. Mm-hmm. And I mean, as you'll know as well, Wayne, crime novels are enduringly and massively popular. Mm-hmm. They must make up, at least 3/4 of the genre fiction shelf in any supermarket, mustn't they? It's, incredible. And so what was happening was they were taking Colony to their meetings, and whoever it was there that was looking at the figures was saying, look, nobody buys action thriller, and particularly in this country. Mm-hmm. So we always ended up in that same situation where they were like, we love this book, but we just don't think we can sell it. Mm-hmm. And a number of them, in fact, suggested that instead of writing action thrillers, I put that down and started writing crime. And it's something that I'd considered and something I've dabbled with, but, it's not something that's always been my first love.
It's not where your heart is, yeah.
No. So what we decided to do was put it down for a bit. We didn't want to exhaust it. We thought, well, look, we know that it's a good book. We know that people are interested in it. They enjoy it. But we know we've got this issue with where it's going to sit in the market, basically. So we put it down. And over the course of the next couple of years, I wrote another novel. It was another action thriller. And that's effectively ready and waiting for editing, and I'm hopefully going to bring that out next year. And then I had a bit of a dabble with crime and things of that nature as well, just to see, dip a toe in and see how it felt, and it didn't feel too bad, to be honest. And I've got one that I'm still sort of keeping in the air somehow. And yeah, it was probably when lockdown kicked in, really, that it occurred to me that so much time had passed between the first time we queried publishers about this novel and now, and society had changed so much in terms of online sales and, as opposed to high street and things of that nature, that it seemed like the right time to start approaching publishers again. And yeah, I was very lucky to be offered a contract with the Book Guild Publishing, who are an independent publisher. They probably bring out about 100 titles a year, so probably sort of medium, small, I guess. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's they've done an absolutely fantastic job. I really can't fault. I'm sat here now looking at the author copy that came through late last week, and it's just how I'd imagined and just how I'd hoped that it would turn out. Yeah, so yeah, we got there in the end.
Yeah, that's great. So it's exciting times. So how do you, obviously you've got this busy day job that you do where in normal times, where presumably you're doing lots of travel and different bits and pieces as well. So how do you manage to fit your writing around your real life, if you like, and your job and puppies and kids and all the rest of it?
Yeah, well, with great difficulty, really, Wayne, is the honest answer. It's not, I mean, no, we've all got the same pressures, and nobody just sits around, or a few people do, with the liberty to just write all day. But yeah, it is a stressful job. I mean, as well as being exciting, and I'm lucky to be doing it. Really, I know an awful lot of people that haven't been able to stay in it over the years for various reasons, but it is also very demanding. There is a lot of travel, as you say. I'm towards the other end of the spectrum with it now, where I'm less out on site and I'm much more giving consultancy advice and coming up with schemes and strategies for investigations and things. So that's not so much of an issue for me anymore. But yeah, it's all linked into development basically in this country. So there's very little archaeology that gets done outside of universities, that is, in this country, which isn't funded by developers before they build houses or install pipes or whatever it is they're doing.
Yeah, so you're doing that. So when you do get these, presumably, like most of us, these little these thin slices of time or whatever, how do you get into the zone to be able to get stuff done? Because that's a lot of the thing with a lot of people. Even when you sort of carve out an hour or half an hour or whatever it might be, the danger is by the time you've got the thing open, you've opened your Word document or your Scrivener or whatever it is that you're writing on, and you start looking at it and you're thinking about what you wrote yesterday and what you need to write today, then your time's up. So how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I do it however I can, really, Wayne. I'm always more productive in the morning. So if there's something that I feel I need to get done, or if I'm at a particular point in a book where I know that I need to really concentrate and really make things tie up, then I will try and get up as early as I possibly can in the morning. When I was writing my second novel, I got up pretty much every morning. I got into a routine of getting up every morning for the best part of a year at 4:00 in the morning, which is, if you'd said that to me back in my teenage years, I'd probably have had a stroke or something, at the very thought of doing that ever. Yeah. But that was how I dealt with it for that particular book. I got into that routine. It became second nature to me. After the first couple of weeks of doing it, I couldn't not do it. I was up, I had hours before work, so I could just bash out as many words as I could, and then yeah, it really did. It really was the best sort of writing routine that I've ever got into. I guess now that I've got kids and I've got, as you say, the puppy and a job and all the rest of it going on, it's more usually later at night that I'm able to finally turn to doing anything at all. And it's well, for me, it's not ideal. I've used a lot of my energy for the day by that point. So I'm kind of, settling down, and my brain's a bit more sluggish. So I have to revisit it more times. So yeah, it's making the best of the time that you've got, really, isn't it?
And that's kind of how you approach it. So if you were starting a new book tomorrow, how would you go about it? Do you, obviously you're in a big part of your day job presumably is research and everything else. So do you tend to start off with that side of things and you start researching and you're planning and you're laying the groundwork, so to speak, or do you just go, hang on a minute, I've got this idea for a scene, or I've got this idea for a first chapter, or whatever it might be, and off you go? How do you go about it?
Well, I think certainly with Colony, and certainly with the second novel as well, and most other things that I've written, it's always started with just an urge to write a particular scene or a particular event or sequence. And I mean, with Colony as an example, there is the prologue is basically a prehistoric hunter, and he's running away, or rather he's skiing away from something that's chasing him. And you don't find out exactly what it is that's chasing him, but he is tearing it through this blizzard, down hills and through valleys. And this was something that I just needed to put on the page. It occurred to me, and it needed to come out. It needed to flow out through into the keyboard and be translated into words. So that's how it started with Colony. And I think after I'd got that down, it kind of made the book seem like a reality.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's, it wasn't just a floating concept anymore. There was a starting point. There was a first letter to the sentence, and that obviously gave me the impetus to then add bits on and effectively complete that sentence. So yeah, it was. I guess it always starts with a bang, really.
And off you go. What would you say is your favourite part of the whole process from beginning to end?
Probably research, ironically.
Mm-hmm.
Having just said that, it's the sort of impetuousness that starts it all off. I love the research. In Colony, we've got submarines, we've got helicopters, we've got, perhaps unsurprisingly for somebody from an archaeological background, we've got a mechanical excavator at one point. Mm-hmm. We've got species, both modern and ancient. We've got characters from all over the world. We've got so many different concepts and technologies and things in there, and I can honestly say that researching each and every one of them was just it was a wonderful thing to do. These were all things that I'd never really come to know in any great detail before at all. Sorry, go on, Wayne.
No, all I was going to say was with your research, do you find that, because especially as you say, if it's a large part of your day job and you're collecting all this information, do you find that on the first draft you tend to go a bit overboard, maybe with because you're excited by it, it's interesting, so do you throw it all in there and then do you end up stripping it back? How do you know how much is enough with the
definitely, yeah, definitely yes. In answer to your question, the research is wonderful, and you're reading it, and you somewhere in your brain you're thinking, God, this is amazing to me. This must be really amazing to everybody else. I must get this down on the page. Everybody's going to lap it up. Yeah. And so down it goes, and before you know it, you've got 5 pages about why a helicopter with 2 rotors, one goes one direction and one goes the other. And okay, there may be a sort of an interest in that for some people, but with the best will in the world, it's not going to keep your novel fast paced. So come the editing phase, I think that's really where you stand back, don't you, and you have a look at it and you say, okay, I really love this bit, and as much as it's got to pain me to take this detail out, nobody's really going to be interested in this. It doesn't further the story, so out it comes. I think the sort of best example of that for me with Colony was when I was looking at the submarine side of things, and I knew that there were going to be some scenes where there were some almost chases in the submarine where it was going at high speed. And so I started looking into, how fast can a submarine go? And if it wants to go really fast, what would the technology be? Mm-hmm. And I came across this concept of supercavitation, it's called, which is effectively where the submarine generates a bubble around itself. And that air bubble will, because due to sort of frictional forces, that air bubble will travel much faster through water.
A bit like aerodynamics, but in the water, sort of thing, yeah. Yeah,
absolutely, yeah, than the metal itself. So I had a big sort of spiel about it in the early drafts of Colony and how great it was, and then when it came to editing, it was, the realization dawned that actually it's got nothing to do with the story. We just need
thought it was cool.
I thought it was cool, but realistically, I needed the sub to get from A to B. So, that's what it did.
It has to come out. So, kind of as we move towards wrapping things up, what would you say has been the most helpful piece of creative or inspirational advice that you've been given along the way?
Well, without reservation, I think the best piece of advice that I've been given and that I would pass on to anybody else that's writing or thinking about writing is to write what you know, to write what you love to read. It's cliche, but it's so true. It really does hold true. I mean, when you're putting words on a page and when you're creating something new, a novel that you want people to pick up and in fact spend money on, you are asking them to almost to take a risk in you, to invest. And I think there's nothing worse than investing in something and then realizing that the person or the thing that you've invested in isn't actually that interested in itself.
Yeah.
if that makes sense. And it's quite plainly obvious, isn't it, when you read certain novels, and you can tell that they've been, they're completely commercial. They've been churned out for one purpose and one purpose alone, and that is just to sell copies. There's no or little interest from whoever has written it or ghost written it in the story itself. They just know the mechanics of writing, and bang, this mechanical product comes out. And to me, it's 100% transparent whenever I read anything like that. And it's the last thing that I would ever want a reader to think of my writing. And I think it's probably the worst handicap that you can give yourself as a writer as well. You really need to be putting down your interest and your passion for what it is that you're writing about onto the page, onto each and every page. So yeah, that's probably the best bit of advice that I've had and that I'd pass on.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. And if you were starting again tomorrow as a new writer, what, if anything, would you do differently, or would you go back and tell your younger self?
I would, with the benefit of having followed up Colony with a second book, I would definitely go back and tell myself not to edit as I went along.
Right.
So obviously there were all sorts of things which meant that the producing Colony took a long time, but none of it was helped by the fact that I had this kind of, fastidiousness about not moving on from one chapter to the next until the chapter that I was working on was completely polished, or as polished as it could be in manuscript form. Mm-hmm. And there are any number of issues with that. From my perspective, at least, I know a lot of writers do subscribe to that. But for me, it was basically sapping the energy that I had. It was taking away the momentum that I got for moving on to the next chapter. It was tying me up in details that really, were secondary to actually getting the story down there and sort of bringing the characters to life. And it was also, it was just taking, it was taking so long to complete a couple of chapters that it was almost off-putting. It became too much like hard work, rather than the enjoyable experience that I'd got into it for. So with that in mind, and having learned that lesson from Colony, when I did the second novel, I just went for it. I put words on page, and I maybe tarted up a few little bits as I went along, but nowhere near to the extent that I did with Colony. And in the end, I managed to complete that novel, by contrast with Colony, in just under a year. Mm-hmm. And then I managed to edit it, up to scratch in another couple of months. So it really did streamline the writing process, and I think it produced probably a better flow as well, almost, at least within that second manuscript.
That's great. Well, that's obviously a really good learning thing and that just shows you the benefit of just cracking on and writing novels anyway. I mean, I always say that with people, because it's very rare that the first novel that someone actually writes is the novel that they end up publishing one way or another. They've normally got lots of false starts or lots of other different bits and pieces, but all the other ones really are just teaching you how to do it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like anything else in life, isn't it? You need to keep your eyes on the prize, obviously, but at the same time, you need to be aware of what's going on around you. You need to have a finger on the pulse of why things are working and why things aren't working. And so, treating every novel that you write as a lesson and a learning experience, as well as a means to completing the work itself, is definitely a sensible thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. Well, good luck with Colony. Why don't you tell us, give us a sense of what's up next, or what you're working on now, and also just tell people where they can find out more about you online.
Sure. So, the best place to find out more about me is on the official website, which is www.benjamin-cross.com. And if you log on to the website, you will find links to every other place that you can purchase Colony. It's available from all bookstores in It's available in digital format, so as an ebook and a Nook and everything else, as well as in paperback. You'll also find links to videos and other things that I've been involved with, interviews, background info and all that sort of stuff. So that's probably the place to start. And you can also find sort of links to contacts on Twitter and Facebook and other places where I've got an online presence. And yeah, in terms of what I'm working on now, I'm chipping away at this third novel, about halfway through that at the moment. And yeah, it's going well so far. I've got the second book is ready for editing, and so hopefully I'll kick that into gear at some point in the not too distant future. And really, for the next sort of month or two, Wayne, I guess it's going to be all hands on deck with Colony and sort of getting it out there
and all the stuff that people don't like to do as much as the writing.
Yeah, absolutely.
All the horrible stuff.
yeah. The stuff that we didn't sign up for.
That's it.
Yeah, but have to do.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, best of luck with it, Ben. I'm sure it'll be a success. And for the time being, thanks for coming on Joined Up Writing.
Thanks, Wayne. Thank you very much indeed for having me. It's been an honour.
Joined Up Writing.
There you go. Thanks again to Benjamin Cross, whose book Colony is available from January the 28th, everywhere you can get great books. And I'll put all of those links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk. That's pretty much it for this week. But don't forget you can find the entire back catalogue of interviews on the website. Make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, or wherever else you get your podcasts. And then that way you can have the podcast downloaded automatically every single time, and it would really help me as well because I know how many of you are out there listening. Also remember to leave us a nice rating and review on Apple Podcasts because it really does help others to find the show, or you can recommend it to one of your friends. And if you get a spare 5 minutes and you want to check out some new music, don't forget to look for the Rye Dogs, that's WRYDOGS, the Rye Dogs, on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, or wherever else you get your music, as I'd really appreciate a follow, a share, or just a bit of friendly feedback. Other than that, I'll say goodbye. So thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.